Welcome to the Success in Africa podcast with Dr Modupe, your weekly dose of leadership vitamins to make you successful in Africa.
Hello and welcome to the Success in Africa podcast episode 55. My name is Dr Modupe Taylor Pierce, and I am a scholar and practitioner of leadership and organizational development. Simply put, I study what makes people successful. I have been studying this for 3 decades, and in this podcast, I regularly share insights about people having success in Africa and the lessons that you can learn about how to be successful in Africa. This year, in addition to sharing stories about people who have been successful in Africa, as I did last year, I would also conduct some interviews with those successful people so you can learn from them, hear from them yourself. I started this podcast because I have a vision for Africa. I have a vision of Africa becoming a middle-income continent by the year 2030 and a high-income continent by the year 2040. And for that to come to pass, I need you and every other African to become successful. I encourage you to like and subscribe to this podcast. Yes, click the like button. It won't cost you any money. This episode is brought to you by BCA Online, the one-stop shop for where to master leadership. In today's episode, you are going to see an interview done of me by Marshall Goldsmith. If you haven't heard of Marshall Goldsmith, you need to Google that name. He is the #1 rated leadership coach in the entire world. Marshall has helped some of the most successful CEOs, global CEOs, Fortune 10 company CEOs in the world, including, by the way, the former head of the World Bank. Marshall was kind enough to agree to kickstart our interview series by asking me to enlighten him about leadership in Africa. Enjoy the interview. A lack of understanding of the importance of utilizing time as an asset in order to achieve certain outcomes. And this is very subtle, but when you don't have an understanding, when the vast majority of your population or your workforce doesn't understand that time is money, and when you lose time, you never get it back, that is a big stumbling block to the success of an organization. Because the one thing that they'll always expect at the end of the month is a salary. But they don't necessarily value or expect that they need to produce a certain amount during that month for that salary. So those are the 3 biggest stumbling blocks. Number 1, governance. 2, self-discipline leadership. And 3, a lack of understanding of productivity.
Now, specifically, what are some of the biggest challenges of implementing change, organizational change?
So let me give you an example at one of the challenges. And that challenge is thinking, not recognizing that culture, as Peter Drucker says, eats everything for breakfast. I had the opportunity to serve as an officer in a Chamber of Commerce organization. This was an organization that had not been terribly effective. It had a lot of bad habits in there. Even though everybody understood what needed to be done differently, and even though I explained it, when I started to implement it, the organization nearly vomited me out of it. Because they were so invested in how and what they were doing and had been doing for so long that the rate of change that I was looking to implement was simply not acceptable to them. And their fear of change made them make the calculation that perhaps it is better if this change agent is no longer with us.
You know, you've been ranked one of the top coaches in the world. How can coaching be leveraged in your mind to make a difference in some of the things we've been talking about?
Certainly, when it comes to coaching, one of the values of having a coach and coaching is that a coach helps you to become more aware and therefore make better decisions. Because it is from a zone of awareness that you can make good choices. And what you're not aware of, you don't even realize that you have a choice. And that
Right.
is important for leaders because many times in trying to implement change, in trying to achieve success, we may get married to the idea that there's only one road to getting there, or there are only
Right.
two roads to getting there. When we're faced with a challenge, we think, oh my God, the choices are binary. I either do this or this. And coaching helps us to see various nuances so that we can make better decisions, to put ourselves in positions where we see the perspectives of others and therefore are able to be more empathetic, more understanding, and frankly relate better. Because at the end of the day, leadership is about moving people. It's not machines, it's not equipment, it's people. And people are complex human beings. So coaching is essential for helping us and myself, because I do have a coach, to see the various perspectives that when you're alone or when you're with others who may not be feel so comfortable to challenge you, you may not see it. So that's really, really important for leaders.
Mm.
The second thing that I think is important how coaching helps is that coaching really helps you to hold yourself accountable to
Mm.
following through on the actions that you know need to be done. Because the reality of us as leaders is, for many of us, the road to failure is paved with good intentions.
Well, Modupe, very important point. I've had someone try to help me almost every day for 27 years. And the reason is exactly for what you just said. Follow through is very hard. And one advantage of a coach is you have someone there to hold you accountable, to help you follow through. And we grossly overestimate willpower. I think this is totally correct. So, very, very, very important point. Yeah, my name is Marshall. I'm too cowardly and undisciplined to do all the stuff I teach by myself. I need help. And you know what? It's okay. Let me ask you another question. How about the acceptance of coaching?
I love what you said about grossly overestimating willpower. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I can attest to that.
Well, let me ask you about just the acceptance of coaching across Africa. I'm sure it's going up, but relatively speaking, how's it going in terms of increased acceptance?
It is still way too low.
Okay.
And I'm going to segment it in Africa in the sense that within the private sector, and as in private sector organizations, especially those that are majority owned by non Africans, coaching is fairly widespread.
Okay.
So, whether it's Coca-Cola, Heineken,
Yeah. Yeah.
Schlumberger, these companies that are in Africa, coaching is fairly widespread. Next, you come to international non-governmental organizations. Again, quite widespread. I'd say, 70% utilization amongst executives. Then you start coming down to the private sector companies that are African owned. And there, it's definitely a minority, maybe 1 in 5.
I
Okay.
see.
Then, if you're talking about community based organizations, it's less than 10%. But we haven't hit the bottom of the barrel yet because guess what? Then you come to public sector and state owned enterprises. And their coaching is less than 1%,
I see.
which is sad because the vast majority of the African economy is controlled by public sector. And then these public sector leaders need the coaching more than anybody else, but they are the most unaware of it and haven't been helped to see the benefit of it. And then the next thing becomes, gosh, we don't have money for it.
Yeah. See, Modupe, this is true in all educational endeavors. Pretty much always, those that want it the most need it the least. Those that need it the most want it the least. And so, it's true everywhere, but you've got some very specific breakdowns in Africa to illustrate the point. Now, our good friend Alan Mullally, Alan, just a great guy, one of the greatest leaders in our lifetime, a great believer in peers helping each other. He established this team coaching process and really produced some ridiculously good results. So, how about peer-based problem solving? Where do you see that as a role?
Oh, Marshall, I first became exposed to peer-based problem solving when I was in my mid-30s and had my first CEO opportunity in California. And I can tell you that it is absolutely a gem because not only do you benefit from the examples of others and the experience of others, but frankly, you save yourself the pain and suffering of going through the experience yourself. And you also get it from peers who don't really have an agenda for you because they don't report to you. They don't, you take it, you don't want it, that's up to you. So it is critically important. And it is one of the things that we're also providing in Africa as a service because it's so, so important. And once again, I love the way you put it, those who need it the most get it the least, and vice versa. So we're on a mission. We're on a mission. I'm on a mission to make those kinds of services, the norm rather than the exception, so that whether it's 5 years from now, 3 years from now, when you talk to a leader, whether it's a public sector leader, a private sector leader, an NGO leader in Africa, and you say, hey, do you have a coach? Or are you part of any peer-based problem-solving group? The answer will be yes more times than it'll be no.
I love this. Now, you've already started talking about this, but continue on. What do you see as the future for leadership development in Africa?
I believe that COVID in the long term was a good thing for Africa. Why do I say that? Because COVID forced many people to jump on the technology bandwagon. And as a result, the world became smaller and more transparent. Now, what that also then did is that it increased the demand of Africans for the same benefits and outcomes that they're seeing on their phones, on their screens, in other places, saying, wait a minute, why can't we have this? What's wrong with us? Okay. Now, that also then puts more pressure on leaders. So, whereas 30 years ago, leaders could lead badly and tell their people that, hey, that's just the way it is. This is Africa. Don't expect much. Today, that story, it doesn't sell. So, leaders are having to recognize that they have to do better. Now, what does that mean for leadership enhancement? It means that there is a slightly greater demand for that. And that's starting to have an effect. Now, in the past, and to some extent in the present, leadership development was viewed as a remedial activity. If there's something wrong with you, okay, let's send them to leadership development class. Let's get her a coach because she's not cutting it or he's not cutting it. In the future, it's going to become not a remedial activity, but an essential activity where it will become essential that you won't even get put into leadership position until and unless you have been given that leadership version of driver's ed that we give to people before we give them vehicles to drive. And then in the long-term future, it will become a badge of honor that the champions will be saying, here's my leadership vitamin. Here's who I work with, because they will recognize in the same way that there are leaders in the United States and in Europe who are proud to say, hey, Marshall's my coach. Because the fact that they say Marshall's my coach just elevates them to a certain level. And they're like, oh, wow, you got Marshall. Okay, we want you. Okay, the board of directors wants you for that CEO position. And that's where I see the future of leadership development in Africa.
You know, there's one thing I'm very proud of if I look at my own career. As you mentioned, years ago, the idea of leadership development was fix the loser. Well, I'm not in that business, as you say. I'm so proud because my whole mission is helping great leaders get even better. Yeah. And, you know, that's what you're doing. You're helping great people get better. And it's very important that leaders understand this is not for my clients. They're not losers. I'm not coaching losers. Look, my clients are not a secret. Everyone in the world knows who I coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you say, they're not ashamed to have a coach. I've never coached one client yet that said I can't mention their name. They're not ashamed to have a coach. They're proud to have a coach, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
how many of the top 10 tennis players have coaches? 10? They all got coaches. Well, you know, of course. So one thing, I think this is changing around the world. I'm very proud of it. Number two, one thing I'm trying to do to help the cause is marshallgoldsmith.ai. So the thing is, you're right. Leaders in Africa, all they have to do is go marshallgoldsmith.ai. They can listen to me talk, right? And all of a sudden, those bad leaders start not looking so good anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's be available to everybody all around the world. So very, very exciting. Now, let's get personal. How about your own leadership journey? Let's talk about some of the challenges you've faced, some of your ideas, some things you've overcome.
Well, before I get to that, let me just say, on behalf of all those who benefited from you, I'm so excited about the Marshall Goldsmith AI, because one of the things that you've done, you have been so generous with your knowledge. That I believe is going to be your legacy, and I certainly emulate that in what I do myself. I'm not trying to pretend that I have as much knowledge as you, but the whole concept of just letting people have it because it makes the world better. It's huge. Now, so thank you for that. So let me come to the answer. You know, for me, despite the fact that I was blessed to attend, the U.S. Military Academy, which most people will acknowledge is one of the world's best leadership factories. I remember when I started there, I really had a warped sense of what a leader was. I thought it was the tough guy, the guy who never cried, never bled, never showed weakness, never, all of that. And it took me years to let go of that. Um, and if you look at even the evaluations I received at West Point in the military, you could literally see a trend there. And by the time I was finishing West Point, I could pretend to have some vulnerability, but I really didn't believe in that. And it took years. It took getting married. It took having children and understanding leadership in the home, leadership at work. And so for me, I think my biggest challenge was being more aware of and accepting of my own shortfalls.
Very, very, very deep. To help others develop, start with yourself. I think it's a great message for all leaders and for all coaches. I'm not better than my clients. I have people try to help me all the time. I'm not ashamed of that. So you're helping me right now understand things I don't know. I'm not an expert on leadership in Africa. Don't pretend to be. I can learn from you. So,
Mhm.
let's talk.
Let me add one more thing to that, Marshall. The second big thing I had to struggle with was owning the outcome.
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but oh, it's so much easier to blame somebody else when things don't go right. And yet, as a leader, I had to come to terms with the fact that if something didn't go right, it didn't matter if I had been around or I wasn't. As long as I was the leader, it was on me. There
Right.
were decisions that I made or didn't make or could have made that could have changed the outcome. And
Right.
that process of really owning the outcome was a challenge for me. And I still work on it.
Hmm. Now, finally, you have a leadership enhancement organization yourself. Now, I've talked about how do you practice what you do for you. Talk in conclusion about how do you do it for your own organization?
So at BCA Leadership, one of the things that I think I'm most blessed with is both a board of directors that is very aware and of their responsibility and certainly willing to hold me accountable. It helps that my co-founder sits on the board and we have implicit trust in each other to the point that he can tell me, Modupe, you've got your head up, you know where. You need to pull it up. Similarly, we have cultivated, and this took a little while, a management team of people who also feel comfortable enough with me to tell me when I'm just wrong. And I can't tell you how important that is because as a leader, I've learned that a leader is both the potentially the biggest asset to his or her organization, as well as the biggest liability to his or her organization. And in BCA leadership, with that protective shield around me, we hold each other accountable. So, first of all, we say we must practice what we preach.
Hmm.
We have values, for example, we have values of integrity, growth, service, and we actually talk about it until you probably blue in the face. I suspect some people who would come to BCA would be like, "You guys are a cult," but at the end of the day, because we believe in it and we insist that we all hold each other to that. And that that process of growth and continuous learning and practicing what we preach helps us to ensure that we bring in the right kind of people. And I have to say it, when certain people don't want to live with those values, it actually becomes pretty, routine to move them out because it's obvious. We talk about it. We say, this isn't our values. And if that doesn't work for you, then you're not going to really want to work here.
In conclusion, let me just wrap up by saying I'm so proud to know you. The idea of the 100 coaches idea and the whole philosophy I have is, just take great people, give them everything you know, and, hopefully they build a legacy and live on. And, I look at you as kind of an honorary son and, so proud to have you for honorary son, I'm so proud of you. You're number one, you're really incredibly smart and thoughtful. Some people are smart, but not very thoughtful. And you've got such a good soul. You've got a lot of integrity and you're trying to do what's right. So I just want to say it's my honor to talk to you. It's a wonderful education. And just thank you for all the great work you're doing.
Oh, Marshall, you've made my day. I certainly had already adopted you as an honorary dad, but I love hearing that because again, you embody what we need most of, and I believe that we are blessed to be a blessing to others, and you have been blessed, and you are a blessing to me. And for me, my view is that as I am being blessed, I want to bless others. And that's why we do what we do in Africa, because a friend of mine told me this about 20 years ago when I was sort of doing work. And he looked at me and said, "What are you doing in the US?" I said, "Well, I'm making a living." He says, "Yeah, okay, you're leading, etc. Don't you come from a continent that needs some leaders?" And I realized, you know what, you're right. And therefore, for me, the mission is absolutely transformation through leadership by being a blessing to others. And even your willingness to interview me and to do this is a sign of your intentionality about creating legacy. And I want to thank you for that because you didn't have to do it, and yet you willingly do it. So thank you. And, I hope and pray that I will live up to the same expectations that you have created so that there will be many, many more adopted sons that will come up in Africa and transform our beloved continent.
I love it. And they would be my adopted grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marshall. Thank you for your time and your investment in Africa. Thank you for watching and listening to this episode. I do hope you have learned something useful that will catalyze your journey to becoming successful in Africa. Please share this video, tell your friends about it, because together we can transform our beloved continent of Africa. See you next week.
Tomorrow belongs to those people who prepare for it today. See you next week.